Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session about cage hens campaigns in Europe. Thank you for caring about non-human animals, and thank you for engaging in strategic questions to solve these problems. My name is Stien van der Ploeg. I am the Executive Director of Animal Charity Evaluators, but you're not here for me. You and I are all here for Sean, Kirsty, and Sophie, and to learn from all of their work and achievements and from their questions. So first, they are all going to try and condense their many achievements into just 7 minutes. And after that, we'll have a conversation. If you have questions about their work, please use Swapcard. And if there are questions that we can't get to, there will be office hours immediately after this. And you can just follow us to wherever that happens, which I'm not exactly sure what room that is. But yeah, let's start with Sean. Or you know what, I'll tell you a little bit about this session. So it's about the how to balance caring about caged hens, either through policy or corporate campaigns. And they'll tell you more about that, and I don't want to take up too much of their time. So Sean Gifford is the Managing Director of the Humane League UK. He leads a small but very mighty team of 25 people that are ending the abuse of animals raised for food. Before joining the Humane League UK, over a year ago, Sean spent the last 2 decades running campaigns and communication strategies for some of the world's biggest NGOs and businesses. As the Global Director of Campaigns at Compassion World Farming, he led a coalition of 170 protection organizations to successfully convince the European Commission to introduce new wide-reaching legislation to ban the use of cages in farming. In addition to having led campaigns for charities like People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals and the Fair Trade Foundation, Sean also had a stint in the private sector, heading up global ethical campaigns for that smelly, radical cosmetics chain, Lush Cosmetics. Please welcome Sean. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Stien, so much for that wonderful introduction. Yeah, when I was at Lush, I got a lot of free soap. But this is my first effective altruism gathering, so it's really wonderful to see so many friendly and supportive faces. And I just wish somebody would have told me that the vegan Kit Kats would disappear as quickly as they did. So next time, I'm going to get right in there. I work at the Humane League UK. I've been with them for 1 year now. And I'm just going to talk about really quickly who we are and the cage-free campaign's work that we've done in the UK, and then try and put it in a bit of a European perspective. So we've got about 6 minutes, so it will be an absolute whistle-stop tour of what we do. But the Humane League UK, we exist to end the abuse of animals raised for food. So we have a real laser-like focus on securing corporate animal welfare commitments around the breed of fast-growing chickens. So we campaign around getting retailers to sign up to the Better Chicken commitment, as well as cage-free campaigning, so for egg-laying hens throughout the UK. And we also focus on fish, one of the most forgotten of all farmed animals. We bring about change through corporate campaigning work, through the judiciary. We just launched a judicial review against the government. We took the Department of the Environment and Farming and Rural Affairs to court over their failure to uphold basic animal welfare legislation that should see fast-growing breeds of chicken outlawed. And we're also campaigning through legislation to get basic animal welfare standards at the time of slaughter instituted for fish in the UK. And we, of course, focus on egg-laying hens as well. We're part of an international organization that was founded in the US in 2005. We are the sister setup of the Humane League over in the US. In the UK, we also have affiliates in Mexico and Japan. And in 2016, the Humane League set up the Open Wing Alliance, which is a network of almost 100 animal protection organizations across the globe, operating in 70 countries. We share expertise, resources, strategy, mainly with the one singular focus of getting egg-laying hens out of cages. It's a powerful, powerful coalition. And much of the cage-free progress that we've seen in the EU and globally is down, well, in part to this coalition of organizations. And because of our way of working, we've been ranked as a top charity by the good folk at ACE every single year in a row. Here to talk about our approach to cage campaigning in the UK specifically. And on this graph, you'll see the state of play. Right now in the UK, as of 2002, we're at 72% of production of eggs in this country come from cage-free systems. It's mainly free-range systems, but the picture wasn't as rosy back in 2016, 2017, when THL UK was founded and we began looking at this space and how we could add real value. 50% of hens were still languishing in cages back then, despite there being a massive set of corporations in the UK, major corporations and retailers, all having committed to phasing out eggs in their supply chains. But those commitments weren't until 2022, until 2025. So when we looked at this work in 2016, 2017, there were millions of hens still in cages, and we wanted to accelerate that progress really quickly. And by assessing the market, we realized that there was one major egg producer called Noble Foods. They accounted for 60% of all cage production in this country. They hadn't made a commitment. They had a public-facing brand. Noble Foods, they sell Big and Fresh. They also sell Happy Eggs. And so THL launched a campaign, a 6-month integrated pressure campaign, street protests, petitions, undercover investigations, media takeovers. We did this in coalition with other organizations. We literally occupied their headquarters for 4 days straight in the middle of the winter, pressuring them to go completely cage-free in their supply chain. Day 3 of that occupation, Noble Foods committed to going cage-free. So that resulted in 4.3 million hens on the path to leading a better life through that one very specific targeted corporate campaign. And around that time, there were huge new political opportunities coming about in the EU. Labour and Conservative both supporting cage-free initiatives in the party manifestos. There was a sympathetic government. Boris Johnson was in power. DEFRA ministers were on side with our cage-free asks. And the government launched a new action plan for animal welfare. We're incredibly optimistic that we would see new legislation introduced in this space, banning cages for egg-laying hens. And that's when we started our lobbying work properly in this space. Oh, the slides don't want to advance. There we go. We introduced new legislation. We formed a coalition of sympathetic MPs in this space. We were optimistic, but then the Conservative government collapsed. The animal welfare agenda completely dried up. And this legislative work is now kind of on the back burner, waiting for a new political opportunity to open up. And I think there's huge parallels to what's happened in the UK with the collapsed animal welfare agenda and what's happening in the EU at the moment. We have a really sympathetic European Commission who wants to see new legislation introduced. And corporate adversaries, people like organizations like Nestle and Mondelez, who used to be our adversaries and campaign targets, are now our allies in speaking up on our behalf in the halls of power, in Parliament, supporting these calls for new legislation. and really think the time is right for legislation to come into effect because we've reached the 60% market saturation of cage-free production in the EU. But everything hangs in the balance because a new commission could come into power and a whole new set of MEPs get elected in 2024. So we are in a desperate race to get this legislation introduced during this new, with this current sympathetic group of parliamentarians that we have behind us. And yeah, I just sincerely hope we don't see a significant change up in government at the next European elections like we have in the UK, which put some of our legislative ambitions back a little bit. I still think we're going to see and still get new legislation, cage-free legislation for hens in the UK within the next 12 to 18 months. It's going to be a battle. It's going to be a fight. It's a lot more uphill now than when we started, but we're very excited about this work. And I'm really excited about working in coalition with your group for animals, with Anima and all the other fantastic NGOs that are here today, because I think it's a real possibility of what we can achieve. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean, for keeping it tight and also especially for all this life-changing work that you do. Kirsty, we worked a little bit together at Anima International, but Kirsty has been around working for animals for a really, really long time. She's the executive director of Anima International, and she began her animal advocacy career aged 9 by organizing a sponsored silence to collect funds for abused donkeys. Now she describes herself as doing all she can to ensure her animal advocacy work has the same level of dedication, but is hopefully a little bit more effective. Thank you, Kirsty.
All right, let's see if this works. I'm still on the Humane League's time, apparently. There we go. Okay, so this is me. And I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to cage-free campaigns in Eastern Europe. In case you haven't noticed by my name, my accent, I'm not from Eastern Europe, I'm not from Central Europe, but I do work for an organization that does a lot of good work in the organization, in the area. What is Anima International? Very briefly, even briefer than this brief presentation, we work to create a world that is free from animal suffering. We do that through various means: legislative advocacy, corporate campaigns, movement building, what else? Food system transformation. They're all tools that we use to help us get to the goal, which is animal liberation. This is where we are active. It's a little bit out of date. You can add Bulgaria to this list now, and I will let you try and pin the name of the country on where it is on the map. But that gives you an idea of where we're currently focused. Very briefly, some ideas on progress that we've seen in the last few years. In Denmark, I know it's not in Eastern Europe, but we do work there, and we've seen a complete change in the cage industry. And just last year, there was, in fact, a legislative ban on cages for hens. We saw very similar results in Norway with, the industry was essentially wiped out overnight. When I say industry, the caged egg industry. In countries like Poland, we've seen huge change. Corporate campaigns have made a lot of companies promise to go cage-free, and we're now seeing more and more actually implement that. And in countries that are potentially harder to work in, like Ukraine, for example, we actually started the first cage-free campaigns that the country had ever seen. I'll tell you a little bit more about challenges working in Ukraine later. Our current focuses, I wanted to briefly mention two. The first one is implementation. So we've talked quite a lot about corporate commitments already in this short period of time, but implementation is essentially the second step there. We can't consider the campaign finished until it's actually implemented, and then even further get that legislation in place. So yeah, implementation is a big focus for us in Eastern Central Europe. Secondly to that, we're also focusing a lot more now on the EU legislation, so the legislation that Sean was just mentioning. I think we perhaps came into this a little bit late, Anima International, but we're trying to catch up a little bit here and really make this impact in countries like Poland and Bulgaria, making sure that the governments do not vote against the legislation when it does come up for vote. So, Eastern European perspective. So I'm going to talk about these 5 countries. They're the 5 countries we currently work in Eastern Central Europe. Just to give you a brief overview there, we've got Poland, Ukraine, Belarus, Bulgaria, and Russia. When thinking about preparing for this talk, I was thinking, well, what actually can I bring to you guys that some of you have been in the movement longer than I have? Maybe you're experts in cage-free. What can I tell you that you either don't already know or you will find interesting? So I decided to talk about the difficulties and what we've seen in Eastern Europe that are in many ways very specific to that area, or at least rarer than in some other regions. The first thing I wanted to talk about is corruption. That's something that we've seen quite a lot in all of these countries to a different extent. So for example, in Ukraine, all of the top 3 egg producers, they basically own most of the market entirely. And when your strategy is to divide and conquer, it's very difficult to do that when you can't divide them. So that was a big issue. Countries like Bulgaria, they have been rated as like the most corrupt country in the EU for about 7 years running, something like that. Lowest median salary and one of the highest wealth inequality. So that's also something else that you have to consider when working on these campaigns. Belarus, very difficult for many reasons, but the entire egg industry is owned by the government there. So that poses yet more challenges, shall we say. And it's time to get creative there. Second, I wanted to mention the fact that in these countries, there is quite often less of a very clear social movement, or at least a history of these kinds of social movements, and there is less understanding that society can change things in the world. Thirdly, we work to actually build these organizations in these countries because there is very little currently. And what there is usually on the more radical side. Also means we've seen less cage-free success than we would necessarily want in some of these countries. In others like Poland, it's been different. We've seen a lot of success there. And briefly, the dangers, risks of working in countries like Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, very difficult even before the war, dangerous to even work there to an extent. And just to leave you with one point, that even though I'm here to talk about Eastern Europe, we really have to consider the cage-free campaign as a global issue, because even if the EU does pass this legislation, even if all companies in Europe do commit to this, unless Eastern Europe does as well, Western Europe is just going to import from the East and the trade will continue. And if we're ever going to get here, animal liberation, it needs to be a global campaign. Thanks.
Thank you, Kirsty, for inspiring all of us to continue working on this. Sophie de Jonckheere is trained in law, holds both a master's in human rights and democratization and an MBA degree. Now, as the development strategist at Eurogroup for Animals, Sophie plays a critical role in helping pan-European animal advocacy endeavors deliver to their full potential. Before joining Eurogroup for Animals, Sophie had successes at UNHCR and worked for almost a decade with various European NGOs and interest groups in Brussels, whom she advised on advocacy, political, and legal affairs. And now we're lucky to have her fight for animals. Sophie, thank you.
Thank you very much, Steen. Slightly different type of organization from the other groups. You've just heard from two very, or rather unitary organizations, I would say, one brand, a strong brand across a certain region. I work for Eurogroup for Animals. Eurogroup for Animals is a pan-European network. Yeah, it's a pan-European network that is federating over 90 organizations working on political advocacy for animals. So Europe is the keyword and network is the keyword. We leverage the power of our members to influence European decision makers in favor of animals. And Europe is an important place. Europe is 447 million people, lots of animals farmed, a lot of land. It's climate-wise quite a moderately hot place, so it's likely that it will continue to play an important role in the future. And very important, it's a very big global trader, so it has a lot of trade power, and people are, generally speaking, rather wealthy compared to perhaps other continents, so it has a big leverage capacity. Most important of all, it has one market, so there's no customs within Europe. It's 27 countries, so it brings a certain level of complexity in decision making. So it means also 27 different fiscal structures, economic dynamics, political parties and organizations. But there is one regulatory framework on those areas for which the European Union is competent, which is not everything we work on at Eurogroup for Animals, but for farm animals, it's really, really important. Our mission, our vision is, like I think anyone here in the room, is a Europe that cares for animals, a Europe where the well-being of every animal is actually assured as an individual. We do that by federating all these groups into perhaps the end of the transformation value chain in animal advocacy, although I prefer not to look at it linearly but circular. You have all these street protesting and public mobilization organizations. You have all these wonderful organizations doing corporate campaigning and securing corporate commitments, but then there's a moment where we want all of that to be rooted into legislation, so there's no way back. And this is what we do. We do it technically at the EU bubble, Brussels bubble level, but we also do it by mobilizing our members across Europe to run political advocacy work in their own environments. So I'm here to speak about caged hens and the campaign that our colleagues already referred to. We help run a European Citizens Initiative. A European Citizens Initiative is a formal instrument of the European Union, allowing the closest what you can get to direct democracy, so allowing over 1 million of people signing a certain petition, and it's not just any million of people, it's quite rigorously regulated, so you really have a lot of rules to respect. You have a number of countries to be covered, but if you manage to do all of that within the rules of the EU, you actually have a possibility to formally solicit the European Commission to undertake a certain change. They don't have to accept it, they don't have to do anything about it, but that's where smart campaigning comes in, because if you have been doing other work, generating a rather positive opening, and if your timing is right, and we had a concurrence of a lot of circumstances, we had a vibrant climate movement, we had a pandemic, and we managed to place animal considerations in all of these global societal challenges in such a way that we had this amazing opening with the new Commission, which was set up in 2012, 2020, has another year to go until the elections in May 2024. And so this European Citizens Initiative, which was successful, started in 28, now in 27. Unfortunately, we lost the UK. It's the first successful initiative for farmed animals. And it arrived at a moment where the European Commission had a listening ear. We were very lucky because the European Commission formally committed to do something about it and to embrace this in the fundamental revamp that they are now working on of the European animal protection legislation. Europe is one of the few continents where there is already quite a bit of legislation, and all that legislation as part of the European Union's refitting initiative is going to be revisited to ensure that it actually delivers the impact it was meant to deliver, but didn't deliver in a lot of cases. So they're going to revisit all of these laws, create a big package of a framework law, and in that framework law we will also chip in the considerations around caged hens, amongst many other things, because there is no European legislation on dairy cows, for example. There's no European legislation on turkeys, so there's not a lot of European legislation that is applicable to fish. We are looking to see all those different species and the issues they face enshrined into this new framework law, which we call secondary law. And then in the second stage, we're looking at the possibility of having kind of sub-laws, tertiary laws that are going to define the nuts and bolts of what is actually going to happen. Very quickly, EU laws may sound easy, very complicated. 27 countries have to agree. Very, very complicated. Very long. Takes a lot of time. I know a lot of you are into this direct action and manage to obtain these corporate commitments in a relatively short period of time. None of that in political advocacy. It takes us an average 5 years to change a European law, then another 5 years before it's properly implemented, and then we're not even talking about enforcement and actually impact delivery. So a lot of you may think, ooh, does it really make sense? Is this effective? I think it is. I think there's no plan B. It has to happen, but we have to be realistic that this takes a lot of time. Where are we now? This is the pre-legislative process. There's a whole process preceding the actual first proposal of the law. We're almost there. There's been a first draft impact assessment, but it was leaked and now it's been sent back to the drafters. So we're unsure if the very ambitious elements that were in there are still going to be in there when eventually the draft is released, probably now rather around October, November. And once the draft is released, a whole, classical decision-making process is going to happen with Parliament on one side, Council on the other side. Council is not a homogeneous thing. It's 27 member states, remember, and this is where we work with all our member organizations in our domestic environment to actually have, as Kirsty was saying, make sure that the governments in their own domestic environments are not taking positions against a certain change. What can we do at the national level? Make sure we keep having these company commitments. Market dynamics are very important. Obtaining national bans will put you in a better position to actually obtain a positive vote later on in the council from your own country. Incentives, making sure that whatever incentives exist are supportive of the change and not constitute disincentives for the change you want to make happen. But also, we need to make sure that whatever we change to is actually really going to be better and not a kind of a cheap, quick fix for the cages. And of course, very important, we need to demonstrate the feasibility, the economic feasibility of change. And I'm sure we'll come to that in a moment when we have our debate. What do we do at Eurogroup for Animals? We make sure we speak with a united voice. If we're not united, we are very easily discarded. The divide and conquer strategy that Kirsty was referring to is being used all the time by our adversaries. And it's very easy if we come with slightly different messages that decision makers say, ooh, it's confused. There's no consensus. Let's hold back. So this is very, very, very important to keep in mind and to coordinate our work. We use all imaginable official channels. We keep the political pressure high, very often also through our member organizations' actions. And we try to make sure that any national progress also in the corporate domain actually is seen and contributes to the change at the European level. And the last one, not an important one, that Kirsty was also slightly referring to, is that we're trying to get into this law, and this is really going to be revolutionary, some kind of reciprocity requirements relating to trade, so that not only standards are levered up in Europe, but also that entry into Europe is made conditional to the respect of European legislation of animal products. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, all of you. Okay, let's get to some questions. But before we get to audience questions or my questions, do you have any reflections on each other's or questions for each other? I don't know if you, for instance, work together, or how often you get to discuss these things.
So this is the first time I've met either of these people.
So I think this is really important. Is in the session question that was, thrown at us in saying, okay, let's do this session. The question was, what's better, corporate campaigning or legislative change? Of course, this is not the question. There's not an or consideration. It's and, but I think there's a lot we can do to make the work done on corporate campaigning count more into legislative processes, and probably vice versa, to help strengthen corporate campaigns.
Yeah, because it's just a tool to get us to that one place. And in order to do that, we need to, even if we're using slightly different tools, we need to do it in a connected way.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that I think that works really nicely between our three organizations is that all of the corporate campaigning and the corporate commitments that we've secured over the years from massive multinationals like Unilever and Mondelez, Nestle, with their cage-free commitments, that was a battle that took a long time to win. And now we're at a moment where at least European cage-free production is so big and the businesses are so invested in the future of cage-free campaigning that they are becoming our political allies and making representations to the Commission, to European Parliament, signing statements of support. And so I think it's a wonderful thing with the corporate campaigning actually then the success of that being leveraged to drive political change.
But I think that's still too weak, because when I'm looking at what happens today, so the European Commission is writing a piece of law, a very important piece of law. They need all the time backing evidence, because if they don't have strong backing evidence, they know they're going to be challenged, because we are only very few animal charities in Brussels. We have our own powers and influence. We're well established, but we're really few when you compare to industry actors that are more than 500 registered in the Transparency Register in the EU. And so we all the time need to feed the European Commission with evidence so that they feel comfortable about making a change happen. And what they tell us is that, yeah, these companies, they come and speak about their plastics policy, or they speak about how they're going to make their supply chains more climate resilient and things like that. They rarely really speak out proactively about their commitments to animal welfare. And they rarely share data. And there's very little to no research demonstrating the economic viability of those front-runners' choices in a way that is solid and robust and that the European Commission can fall back on. So we feel a little bit disempowered in that continuous request for evidence, because we're not exploiting enough what is happening. We're not leveraging enough the corporate campaigning work that is being done. There's probably more we could do. But we're running a bit behind the facts, as you say.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, is there anyone from Rethink Priorities here? The guy who told me he was coming is lying to me then. But it sounds like, okay, there we go. You need to get to work. No, it sounds like, in terms of research, maybe organizations like Rethink could help. I don't know. Might be worth talking about.
Can I ask you something about compliance and enforcement? So there's been questions about corporate commitments. A lot of companies are doing that, but now we need to make sure that they're following through. And then there's actually also a lot of, many countries have a lot of laws already in place to protect animals, but they're not necessarily enforced because they're not prioritized. How does that affect the balance that you're trying to make? Does that affect the tractability on what you, for instance, choose to pursue? Because you all have very limited funding, you all have very limited capacity. Does this question at all affect how you make your strategic decisions?
I can take the corporate compliance bit of that question. The Open Wing Alliance, we just released a report into all of the cage-free commitments that have been made that sunsetted in 2022, right? So these are companies who pledged to go cage-free by that cutoff date. And that report shows that 89% of those corporate commitments have been completely fulfilled on time. And out of the remaining corporates that haven't hit that deadline, a majority of them are still reporting on their progress, which is great. And the remaining that haven't done anything, that's where our accountability public campaigning kicks in. And we can lead pressure campaigns to name and shame and pressure them to hit those commitments. And it really varies by region. So I think the Americans, the American corporations, and I'm American, so I think they make a lot of easy and quick commitments and a lot of promises that then they backtrack on. In Europe, it's slightly different. Corporates who have made commitments, they need to have a closer eye kept on them, but for the most part, they're coming good to their promises. And in Asia, where the Open Wing Alliance works quite a lot, we find it really difficult, or more challenging, to secure those initial corporate commitments, but once the Asian businesses do commit, they stay true to their promise. And so it is, yeah, it's a process in each country.
I see you nodding, Kirsty. Do you have a sense it's the same in Eastern, Central Europe, Nordic countries?
Yeah, so I will just say that in Eastern Europe, such as Ukraine, Russia, Belarus, there's very little cage-free progress, and I think there are no commitments. We generally did awareness campaigns in countries like Belarus, for example. But in terms of enforcement in Poland, it's actually pretty good. So I think I was nodding because I was agreeing with Sean that I have this feeling that in Europe, particularly Western, but also Central, and maybe one day Eastern Europe as well, I think once companies commit, in general, they follow through. It's not entirely always the case, but they're usually pretty good. And I mean, I was talking to one of my colleagues from Poland last week, and she was telling me that there are like huge retailers in Poland, like Biedronka. Am I saying that right? No, yeah, probably not.
My minimal Polish things, I think that's right. That's the ladybug one, I think, right?
Yeah. They don't sell ladybugs. No, sorry. That's the presentation for later, right? So they actually committed and then implemented before their deadline. And it's not unheard of for companies to do that. So yeah, I think it's different depending on which countries, but there seems to be a split between US, Europe, generalizing a bit, but there is definitely something there. And you mentioned laws. I think in general, laws are followed. Not always, but I think it's probably better than most people think. And where was I going with this? So I think there's also this question of, is it followed based on how I read it, someone with no training in law, or is it followed according to the spirit of the law, which is, you know, a legal term, a legal way of thinking about it. So yeah, I think that's something, good question to ask.
Do you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, so this new legislative review is actually going to address some of that. So some laws are very poorly implemented. I'm thinking, for example, it's not on cage hens, but the European law on pig welfare, a number of elements in that law were put in to actually force a reconsideration of the way pigs are being reared, like the tail docking. However, if you just keep as many pigs in the same conditions, you can't stop tail docking because they'll chew each other's tail. And so it didn't happen across Europe. There were a lot of audits of the European Commission demonstrating that less than, basically only Sweden was implementing the legislation. So clearly we have run a pan-European campaign about this, about mutilations in pigs. We have done our best to demonstrate that certain pieces of legislation just didn't work because they were ill-conceived and because there was not enough pressure and level playing field. So it's always this dance between corporate dynamics and societal development and law. A law only works if it comes in at a moment where there's already a vision for where you need to go and sufficient leverage, I would say, in the markets and in society. Yeah. And probably on pigs there wasn't, because it was the mainstream way of rearing pigs, and it still is. So as part of the legislative review, they are going to reconsider all the laws to not go lower, but to guide implementation much more. And I think our role is really also that one, is to show that vision. What does it take to do this? What do you need to change? Is it economically viable? Are there good examples, case studies that demonstrate that actually this and that company did it and it works really well? Why is it working well in Sweden? And are they not competitive with other European member states? Why do they do it? And why do other states don't do it? And why is the Commission not, you know, doing procedures afterwards to condemn the member states that don't implement it? So we hope that the new legislation will change that dynamic. Mm.
A little bit of a follow-up question, and maybe this is also one that's not as relevant in Europe, but something you said earlier, Sean, that many corporations actually do follow through with their commitments. Still, some animal advocates say are worried about humane washing. Do you have a sense that this welfare campaigns and advocating for welfare policy change, if one or the other potentially lead more to total abolishing eventually of using animals for entertainment, basically, meaning also unnecessary food? Do you have a sense of that impact? Mm. Or any of you?
I mean, yeah, I can speak to anything. But
yeah, please.
So a quick answer. I wonder if humane washing companies that actually do that, maybe it's good for animal advocates, because then, as Sean was saying, we can jump on that and really show hypocrisy in the press and use them as targets, and then make other companies scared of doing that in the future. So in some ways it can be seen as a good tactic. So I don't know, it's not necessarily that when you see a company doing it, you'll be rubbing your hands like, yes, can't wait to get my claws into that, but there is a little bit of that there. And also, I was speaking to Jakob, who's over there earlier, and he was telling me that he worries more about companies that put all of the emphasis to change and the responsibility on the consumer rather than on themselves. And I think I agree that that is more of a concern, to me at least, than humane washing. Yeah.
Yeah. I think every single time we launch a corporate campaign, you know, it's a multifaceted campaign. It, you know, puts pressure on the company's trustees, on their shareholders. It damages their brand, but ultimately it's always raising awareness of the horrific conditions that animals are suffering from in industrial agricultural systems. You know, and it's a real coup and it's a real win when we're able to get undercover investigation footage of animals in distress on the national news, because it just bursts that bubble that the average consumer has in their mind that everything is okay. And every time we do an interview, we talk about the sentience of animals, how they're capable of suffering and feeling pain and experiencing joy, and how their lives need looking out for, right? And so I think while we're driving corporate change, in the same breath, we're also raising awareness and sensitizing people to the sentience of animals, and that's getting us systematically closer to that end game where animals aren't suffering in food systems at all.
Yeah, I think that's important perspectives, and that's also why at ACE we still really value and just see that corporate campaigns work.
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
I'm just laughing here because I've got this radar, right, where I can tell that you worked for Peter. Just based on the way you say your sound bites, because I was trained in the same way, so I can see someone else from the Peter Academy. So
we both work for the same NGO.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's very good.
I think I will move to I'll move to a question from Haven. This is about your plans. What do you think will be the biggest campaigns you'll be working on in the next 5 to 10 years?
Like for caged hens or in general?
I'm not sure if people here specifically showed up for caged hens or in general, but if there's something in particular that you think is really important or that you're proud of, then I don't think you have to stick to the chickens.
We're going to be busy the coming 10 years with this EU legislation, so we expect probably more than 10 elements of tertiary law coming from that general framework law. There's going to be a lot coming out on fish. We will have a very important role to play there because there's not a lot of actors on fish welfare. On caged eggs, I think our biggest struggle in the coming years, I would say until the law is adopted, and it could take longer or less, but we're not working on a horizon of less than 3 years for this framework law to be adopted. So it will take all of the next term of the European Commission. We know that transition times is going to be the biggest thing. And our claims around transition times need to be reinforced with these data arguments. So I would say on cage hens, that's going to be our focus. It's making sure the transition is as short as possible. But other than that, we'll work a lot on fish.
I'll go.
Go for it.
All right, cool. For us, it's definitely going to be corporate campaigning, targeting companies to sign up to the Better Chicken Commitment. The use of fast-growing breeds in the chicken industry. I mean, in the UK alone, the numbers are so astronomical. It's 1 billion a year are being bred and farmed in a way that has suffering hard-coded into their DNA. So that's going to be a huge amount of our energy and our focus going into that particular piece of work. Right now, about 30% of UK production is done to higher welfare standards, not using the fast-growing breeds of chickens. So we still have, well, we have to crack one of the major retailers, right? So in the UK, that's Tesco, Sainsbury's, Asda, Lidl. And we're quite close with 1 or 2 of the biggies. And as soon as we can get one of those commitments from the big supermarkets, I think the dominoes will start to fall. So over the next 2 to 3 years, it'll be that intense focus. And then it'll shift into compliance work, making sure those commitments are adhered to, kind of like what we're doing with cages at the moment in the UK.
What about you at Anima?
Yeah, so it depends on the country. I feel like every question could be answered with "it depends," which is the worst answer, but it's true. So it depends on the country, what tool we would use, but in general, probably still having a focus on broilers. That's going well in some countries and less well in others. Some are more advanced. I wouldn't be surprised if we start work on fish as well, and potentially even insects. Seems like a smart option. And so that's 10 years.
There's quite a few of them.
Yeah, I've heard there's quite a few. But I think maybe that was 10 years. In 1,000 years, we'll be working on intergalactic species on other planets and maybe digital sentience. So.
Okay. Nice. You're also speaking to the long-termists who might have wandered into this room.
I know how to pander to the crowd.
Let's see. So, international conference, I don't know if they're in this room, but I know there's also people from South America and from the US at this conference. What are the lessons that people in other regions might be able to learn from what's happening here?
Yeah, I've got so many things to say, but
I'll just keep going.
I think one thing
10 minutes.
One thing that could be the most useful is, because we work in part of Europe that is not necessarily, you can't really transfer everything that has happened in Western Europe and North America. I think one of the most important things is to know that just because something works in North America doesn't mean it's going to either work or fail in your country. And that it's okay to, if you feel like something would work better, to follow a different path, because you know your country better than, well, usually than I do. So I think, yeah, that's just different perspectives. I think we're very homogenous in the movement, I think, in terms of strategy, and I would like to see more diverse perspectives on ways we should be going and different strategies.
Yeah, I completely agree. There's no one-size-fits-all solution. In campaigning in places like Asia, Africa, Latin America, I think that the one lesson, though, from some of the success that we've had in Europe is really the working in coalition with others and using our united strength to put resources in the right places at the strategically right time. You know, so as part of the End the Cage Age coalition that Compassion in World Farming and Eurogroup and others were doing, you know, in the legislative process, certain member countries take the presidency of the Council of Ministers, and that presidency can be very influential at key points in the development of legislation. So with our End the Cage Age initiative, we identified the Portuguese presidency as kind of a risk area where there weren't many groups at that time working on caged initiatives, and there wasn't a big movement, a civil society movement or high level of sophistication with the lobbying work that we felt there could have been. And so we were able to pour resources into that one country for a very specific moment that really paid dividends. But that comes with a highly joined up group of organizations working together with a high level of trust. So yeah, as other groups in other parts of the world start beginning this work, I think that's the main lesson, that sharing resource, sharing strategy, and being really selfless with sharing the limelight for the work.
Sophie, can I change the question a little bit for you? When it comes to impact of legislative change, how do you think that could change the lives of chickens in other regions? If laws change in Europe, what will that mean for potentially chickens raised in Africa or Asia?
We're about to publish, I would think it will be out in a month or so, a study that is evidencing, that is really scientifically looking for situations where the development of certain standards or legislations in the European Union generated change in other places in the world. It's what is being called by academics the Brussels effect. So we get this question often, and of course it's the kind of conversation that we're engaging in when we're talking to donors from other continents that look with curiosity and envy at Europe and want to see, what is happening there, also potentially impact the places where they are rooted. So I think there's a huge potential. This legislation creates the possibility for introducing conditionality of imports at the highest level. We have been working on trade and animal welfare for almost 2 decades already as an organization, which means that we're looking at every, not every, but every strategic trade agreement between the European Union and another country, and we try to get animal welfare friendly language in there. Not easy. There's not a chapter in a trade agreement that allows for animal welfare language, but you can use chapters like the chapters on health and sanitary or hygiene conditions to sometimes chip in certain considerations. But in the Mercosur agreement, we actually managed to get in a draft a conditionality agreement related to eggs. So no more import of caged eggs from the whole Mercosur region if that agreement is approved. We hope it's not approved, because in all other respects it's very bad. So we're campaigning actively against it. But it shows how you can actually exploit trade dynamics to leverage successes in one region in another region. And this time we won't have to do it across a number of trade agreements, but potentially we can actually do that at a system level. So it's a system change that we're looking at that is going to enshrine that concept of reciprocity and conditionality into a law. Very, very potentially powerful thing. And it could impact any country Europe trades with. And as I was saying, Europe is the 3rd biggest trade partner in the world. It's a huge trading power. Very important market for imports, very important market for exports.
I think we have time for one more question, and I'm going to go with Frankie's. The question is, what are your biggest bottlenecks? And since we're in a room and at a conference where there's a lot of people with either expertise or looking for ways to spend their money, what are the things that you need most, or where you're stuck on, that you might be able to get support from the people here in this room this weekend?
So I have a couple of ideas immediately. One, we see, unfortunately, new forms of factory farming emerging. It's very small for the moment. Very often it's a pilot plant, like the octopus farm in Canarian Islands, but it shows a trend. We're going to see more of these. We're going to see new intensive business models emerge that are going to exploit new kinds of animals. It wouldn't be prioritized because it's not a lot of animals at this stage, but it's very important. And it's something for which we're not prepared. We're always coming in too late. We're trying to fight it when we're at the licensing stage, whereas we should actually be aware already at the moment of R&D in a company. So that would be one, I would say. This research consideration, making sure we have more economic data about the viability of welfare change, is another very important one. We have a lot of challenges with finding suitable staff. Not easy. Not a lot of people with a lot of capabilities in political advocacy. So very often we end up investing a lot and losing a lot of time in training people on the job. And I would hope that more animal charities will engage into animal advocacy. We'll do that professionally and in a sustained way, appreciating that it's a longer term investment. And I'm very much looking forward to working, for example, with your colleagues in Bulgaria.
Yes. So from my point of view, funding is an obvious answer, so I don't know if anyone wants to give money.
Yeah, and funding.
Go and talk to me later. But I think more interesting perhaps would be, I think for the movement as a whole, not just for Anima International, I think we need to move away from having animal advocacy tied to a certain political outlook. So it's very tied to left wing. Probably for many people it makes sense why that is. But I think if we want to cater to working with conservative governments.
It's not in the EU, interestingly.
No?
It's not, no, it's a cross-party area of interest. It's the cuddly topic that all political groups like to maintain.
Okay, but I think, I don't know, I'm not sure if in, for example, Poland, it is definitely...
I'm not judging on national dynamics, but at the EU level, it's interesting. It's not it's not a challenge.
Okay, so EU level, national level, I think it might be a little bit different, but also in terms of like activists to engage, I think we need to have more diverse ways of thinking, different cognitive worldviews, and that goes in with what I was saying earlier about how we do things. Just get a bit of variety going on.
Yeah. What terrifies me most is the very quick march of industrialization into places like Asia and Africa and Latin America, and that the very cage-free campaigning that we're doing here and the systems that are being dismantled are instead being exported down there. And if once they get established, you're talking about huge sunken capital that will take 50 years to unpick. We'll have to then launch corporate, cage campaigns in those parts of the world. So, yeah, it would be incredible if the EA community could really aggressively fund work in this space preemptively, so we don't make more, work for us later on, kind of like what Sophie was talking about with octopus farming, in the Canary Islands and other spaces.
Thank you all. Thank you three for the incredible work you do for, like you said, billions and billions of animals each year. Please follow their work and also follow these three people right now as they go to their office hours. And yeah, thank you again, and thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.